Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am Budha, product evangelist here at Tyk. And today we're going to be talking about Tyk 101 from zero to managed with Tyk's hybrid cloud solution in 30 minutes, perhaps lesser. We'll take a look at the agenda today, and we're going to be looking at setting things up. It's a two-part process, which is setting up your Tyk Cloud account. If you were here with us last time, you might have already seen us do this in our previous Tyk 101 session. Then we'll be looking to install the worker or the edge gateway, essentially using Docker. And once that will essentially conclude our setup process, and then we'll head on over to adding an API endpoint. We'll look at securing said API endpoint, and then we'll look at rate limiting that API endpoint. There are a couple more activities, time permitting. We might go into some of those bonus bits as we move along, but really the idea here is to get you up and running as easily as possible, as quickly as possible with Tyk's hybrid cloud solution, and get you doing or performing certain specific API-related activities or API management-related activities. Joining me here today, of course, is Andy Smith. Thank you so much, Andy, for joining us. So any questions at any point of time that you might have, do feel free to put that on our chat, on our Q&A section, or just reach out. We will take those questions towards the end. We are obviously looking to accomplish all of this within 30 minutes, so we're going to be running through this really quickly. But once again, hello and welcome, Andy.
Hello, Budha, and everyone else.
Alrighty then, let's jump right in. So what is Tyk's hybrid cloud? It is essentially a flexible and scalable multi-cloud API management solution. What it enables is for you to control multiple API gateways, which is what we call the edge gateways or the worker gateways, across different cloud providers and different regions. And you can do all of this through a single dashboard, which is essentially the power of what we are proposing here. So we'll look at a little bit in detail in terms of why you would want to do something like this. But if you really think about Tyk as a solution, and if you're familiar with it, we've got a few different deployment strategies on top of our open source API gateway. You can start from the left side of the spectrum, which is what I call the full control section, which is your self-managed, where you've got full control over your infrastructure, how you're going to be deploying it, what you do with your configuration, how you're going to be managing it all. It's all on you. You've got the maximum amount of control over there. It obviously comes with a slightly higher total cost of ownership, but again, that's kind of the balance that you're looking for there, where you've got huge amount of control, maybe a little bit more things to manage for you. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got Tyk Cloud, where we take responsibility of managing all of the infrastructure associated with setting up of Tyk, and you do get access to certain degrees of configuration and things that you can do in terms of where you might be able to deploy certain gateways and control planes. But beyond that, the focus here is for you to get up and running with managing your APIs as much as possible without going into the details of infrastructure management as much as you would with self-managed. So this, again, on this side of the spectrum, I would call this more of the high convenience side of the spectrum, where you're really looking at getting up and running really, really quickly and really, really easily without incurring a huge total cost of ownership as you go along. In between all of this, we have our best of both worlds solution, so to speak, which is hybrid. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we are going to be running through the steps of setting this up. So with hybrid, what you get is, if I go a little bit deeper, we've got our two segments here, which is your gateways, which are the worker gateways or the edge gateways. These are going to be managed by you on your own infrastructure. And then you've got Tyk Cloud, or Tyk, essentially managing the control plane of the dashboard, the way you would interact with those different API gateways across different regions and different cloud providers. Now, a typical use case of why you would want to do something like this, or a setup like this where this would come in handy, is essentially when you think about scalability, when you're looking at expansion across regions, or you're looking to work across multiple cloud providers, and you might want to expand into different regions because you might want to have local presence there. You might want to be closer to your audience. You might want to be closer to your end users, reducing latency. You might want to personalize things a little bit more. You may have different compliance requirements that you might have to meet from a region perspective, because the gateway itself is going to be what's going to be looking at the computation, the processing of information that goes through Tyk. So if you've got that, you essentially set up those different edge gateways, your worker gateways in a region of your choosing. And then you've got Tyk Cloud, where you can have this single dashboard, single pane of glass, which will essentially help you manage all of the APIs that are going to be deployed on those different API gateways. Now, with Tyk Cloud, if I just go back really quickly, with Tyk Cloud, you can accomplish the same thing. The difference there is the regions are limited. So if you're looking at Tyk Cloud, you've got 5 regions that are available right now. I think 2 in the US, East and West Coast, 1 in the UK, 1 in Germany, 1 in Singapore, where I am hosting the session from. So if your requirements are met through those regions, if that is your regional requirement, then that is a perfectly fine solution. You should absolutely go with Tyk Cloud. But if that is not, if you're looking to host your gateway in a region that is closer to your audience, which is not part of one of these different areas, then hybrid solution is a better way for you to approach that. So with that, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea, a bit of a sense of when to use a hybrid, why that exists, what kind of the amalgamation of the best of both worlds from your self-managed side of things, where you still get more control in Tyk Hybrid compared to Tyk Cloud in terms of how you would manage the infrastructure for your gateway, as well as some of the configuration updates that you might want to make, changes that you might want to make. But it comes with a slightly higher cost of ownership when it comes compared to Tyk Cloud as well, because now you are responsible for the infrastructure of your gateway as well. So that's kind of where we are. So let's dive in. Hopefully, if you've got any questions at any point, once again, do feel free to use the Q&A section. We will tackle those as we go along. But if not, then just looking at the time, we are about 10 minutes in. So I'm going to be rushing through really quickly in terms of the setup process. So I'm going to head out of this screen sharing really quickly for this as well. So, okay. A couple of prerequisites that I think you might need for this. Obviously, for the cloud installation, which is what we're going to be starting off with, you just need a browser and you don't need anything else really. But for the deployment of the gateway, which we'll be doing as part of step 2, you should have Docker installed in this, because we are going to be using Docker. There are a few different ways in which you can deploy the gateway. There are different, cloud solutions where you might be able to, you can easily host this on AWS. You can host it on Kubernetes or any of the Kubernetes solutions out there, whether it's EKS or you've got Minikube on your local host, you can do that as well. But whatever method you're going to be using to install the gateway, you need to have the prerequisites sorted for that. So if you're using Minikube, you should have Minikube installed. If you are going to be using AWS, then maybe you need the AWS account and the CLI. In our case, today, we're going to be using Docker. So ideally, you should have Docker pre-installed before you can get started up and running with this. So let's go over this step by step and we'll see how we go. I'm going to go to our tyk.io website to sign up for my cloud account. And I can go through the free trial process where you can actually look up how you can sign up for different deployment, different sort of trials that you might want to go for. If you have a cloud account already, then you can easily just sign in from the cloud login. In my case, I do have one, but I'm going to walk you through the sign up flow once again. So I'm going to hit sign up. And once this loads, this is essentially the same screen that you will see from the trial. So let's go into sign up. I'm going to go Tyk Cloud. It asks you a few different questions. So let's look at the use case right now. I'm just going to say product demo for Tyk Hybrid Cloud. Enter some of your details. I'm going to use, let's say, what's a good one? Let's say hybrid. I think I'm spelling that correctly. Hybrid at tyk.io. Company is Tyk. Region, I'm joining you from Asia. And yeah, I think let's call it this. So feel free to use the information, appropriate information right now, because I'm just demonstrating this. So I'm just filling in some information here. I'm going to hit, I've read and accepted terms and conditions, which trust-based. We're all good there. Okay, so this will take us to the final sign-up process, which is where we'll add our final details. We've got hybrid at Tyk.io. Choose a password. Nice, strong one would do. Hopefully I've met the requirements here. Hit confirm. I do believe I'm a human. Oh, this is brutal. This is going to make me hungry right after this. God, that's okay. For the record, pancakes is one of my favorite food out there. So anyway, you usually get like traffic lights and bicycles. What? Shouldn't do pancakes. Anyway, so we're going to be, for today's demonstration, we'll be looking at enterprise trial. This is a five-week trial period and gives you access to pretty much all of the different capabilities of Tyk Cloud that you might want to try out. With the only exception is that you only get one region out of the box available for your control plane and for your edge gateways. Whereas the enterprise, I think on a higher tier, you would get a few different regions where you can host it. But for our purpose, it doesn't really matter. So at this point. So I think because we're going to be hosting our edge gateway locally. So I'm going to call this my demo org. I'm going to select a home region, and this is very, very important because the home region is essentially where your control plane, your dashboard, your management layer is going to be. And in our case, for the free trial, this is where all of our different deployments, whether that is the control plane, the dashboard, or the gateway, is going to be hosted if we were to use cloud hosting. So right now I'm going to be using Singapore, and this is something that you cannot change. So once it is set, it is set. So let's go create our organization. Over here, it asks me between a demo setup and a manual setup. I think I'm just going to select the demo setup. It's a little bit more easier and more convenient to get up and running with. So we'll start off there. Okay, the process has now begun. So this is going to take a few moments before we are ready to go. And while we are waiting, let's have a quick look at what this console, this dashboard essentially looks like. So if you go really, really quickly into overview, you will see, well, as the name suggests, the overview of your organization, your plan, things that you have access to, things that are available to you between teams, environments, control planes, edge gateways. So maybe the best way to go about it is to just think about it from a hierarchy perspective. You start off with, like we did, setting up an organization. So organization essentially is a business entity. Now, it could be an entire company itself, or it could be a specific division of a company, a specific entity specifically. I use the term because you might have, across different regions globally, you may have different entities of a specific business. And ideally, you want to have things set up per those entities because you might want to keep your billing separately. You might want to keep your data separate. So you may have a few different reasons why you might want to do that. Within organizations, you would have teams. So teams, if we go a little bit lower, we have a demo team that has been set up at this moment. I can go under admin and go into teams as well. So a team, again, it's a group of folks. So within the teams, you can set up different roles. You've got organization admin who have access to, well, doing everything, which is managing your environments, managing your users, managing deployments. Below that, or essentially next stage below this, is your, I believe it's an environment admin or a team admin. If I go really quickly. Nope, not looking to create a new team. I'm going in to add a user. So if I add a user, I'll see my different roles here. So team admin is essentially someone who has the ability to add new users or remove users, as well as create deployments. Same, and with members, you are really focusing on your deployments within the environment. So that's kind of the hierarchy that you have here. Now, within teams, your teams could be your development team. It could be a QA team. So within an organization, you may be able to set it up accordingly, however you choose to, where you want to organize things. Teams will have environments. So environments are essentially self-contained within each other, and within environments, you have your deployments. So environments, for example, could be your demo environment, like the name suggests over here. This could be your development environment, could be your staging environment, could be a production environment. So essentially, these are all siloed away from the others. So you're essentially, you could have your test environments and the ways you would interact and create your deployments accordingly, perhaps as you move along. So within environments, you would have deployments. Now, there are a few different kinds of deployments that you can have. Currently, as you can see, you've got a control plane, which is being deployed. And control planes are essentially the management layer. This is the dashboard that is going to help us interact with the API gateway or gateways, depending on how many gateways that you're going to be looking to manage. And it's really, in this case, a really good user interface for you to interact with those capabilities of your gateway. And as we said with gateways, now if you were using just Tyk Cloud, then you would see there is a secondary element to this, which is what we call the edge gateway. This is essentially the worker gateway or the API gateway that is going to be responsible for your computation, for your processing of information. In this case, this is completely managed by us, whereas what we are going to be seeing now is going to be a hybrid solution. So we are still waiting a little bit for the deployment to complete. I think it's almost there, maybe a few more seconds before that. In addition to all of this, we've already looked at teams. We look at accounts and billing. So over here, it'll give you an information of your current subscription level, what you are subscribed to. Right now, I'm just on a free trial with the number of days remaining on that. Equally, if you go within this, it'll tell you the specifics of your current plan. Right now, I can create a sum total of 3 environments. I've already created one. I have access to 2 more that I can create. Same goes with control planes and edge gateways. I can create up to 20 teams, which is great. Gives me a whole lot of flexibility if I want to create different groups of teams together. And then I've got a limit on the number of users as well, which at this point is 30, which I think is going to be plenty for a free trial. If you want to have a look at the different plans that are available, that's also here. You've got your free trial, which is what we are using at the moment. And then we go into the paid plans from launch, grow, scale, and all the way up to enterprise. And really, it comes down to your specific requirements, your use cases, whether you're looking at single teams with lower traffic, single teams with higher traffic, looking at global organizations with multiple teams, or you're looking for a completely tailor-made custom solution that you might need for your particular use case. So you've got those. You've got a few different add-ons that you might want to look into. And yeah, so that gives you hopefully a bit of an idea about the billing, the subscriptions. There is billing administrators as well. This is also kind of another user type where if you're looking for people specifically to take responsibility of the billing within your organization, then this is where you would come. So let's go back. Let's see. Hopefully the deployment is done, at least for the first part. If not, we will move on to the worker gateway segment, and we'll wait for this to happen. It looks like we are deployed. So our control plane is now done, as well as the edge gateway. So if I go a little bit deeper, now that it's deployed, it gives me the information, the summary information of environment, the region, the version, importantly, the team, the plugins. Right now, I think it is defaulting to the latest version, latest stable version, but you do have a choice when you're creating your deployment to choose specific versions if you so desire. Within the control plane, you have the edge gateways, or the edge gateways are essentially connected to control plane. For today's use case, we are probably not going to be interacting too much with this edge gateway because we are going to be hosting our own, but we can definitely have a look at the API manager. So I'm going to click the managing of APIs through this. So let's go over. And if you have used Tyk previously, this should be very, very familiar, especially if you've used the self-managed version. This should be quite familiar. Right now, I do not have any APIs, and we will get to creating that shortly. But this is essentially what the API dashboard looks like at the moment. So this concludes the first step of the setup, which is the Tyk Cloud setup. And again, being mindful of time, we're going to be jumping straight into the next segment of this, which is going to be the installation of the worker gateway, or the edge gateway, using Docker. So for that, the first thing that you should do is you go over to our GitHub repository and look for Tyk Gateway Docker. I will share this link in our chat just in case you are following along. There you go, just in case you're following along. So this is essentially the way for you to install the Tyk Gateway using Docker. And you've got the steps that are all defined over here. Hopefully it is all visible and not too small. So step one, what we will be doing is we're going to be cloning this repository. So let me head on over to this. It's a little messy right now. Just going to make sure nothing is running. That is fine. Okay. So right now I am in the Tyk Gateway Docker. So I am going to head out here. I have created a repository for hybrid demo. Let me create one more. Sorry. Okay, Tyk 101. I'm going to create a brand new directory called Cloud Hybrid Demo and head on over. And I'm going to be cloning the repository right here. So let me get the URL. I'm going to hit git clone, and this should do the trick. Now, something that I learned yesterday is I'm currently using Mac OS 13, and it seems like if you have recently upgraded to Mac OS 13, then this command, the git command, does throw a bit of an error. And the way to fix it is to essentially reinstall your Xcode. So I think the command for that is, I think, xcode -select space install. If you just Google it, you'll find the right command for it. But just keep in mind, if you are getting an error trying to run git clone or any of the git commands, then that's kind of what's stripping you off if you're on the latest version of macOS. It took me a little while to catch that, but just a little tip in case you're getting stuck there. So I've got this done. I'm going to move over to my Sublime Text. So I'm going to use a text editor here, and let me open up the folder where this is residing at the moment. So that's under Tyk 101, Cloud Hybrid Demo, Gateway Docker. Okay. So if you go open up the folder where you've just installed the Tyk Gateway Docker, underneath that, you will find the tyk.hybrid.conf file. And here you go scrolling all the way down to the slave_options. And there are three things that you need to update. So I'm just going to hit Control-Z. And three things to update here would be your org ID, API key, and the MDCB ingress. So the MDCB ingress, you might have seen if you go all the way back to our cloud, we have this here under MDCB URL. So I'm going to copy that, head on over, and paste it here. The next thing to get would be the org ID and API key. So if I go all the way back into my API dashboard, under system management, under users, you may have different users here. Right now, I just have the Tyk system integration, and you'll see the API access credential and the organization ID. So let's start with the org ID really quickly. Change that. And then finally, go over to API key. All right, I'm going to save this. So that's our config done. The final step, well, okay, almost the final step, is to go over to your docker compose.yaml file. And here, if you see under volumes, we are currently set to get our configuration, a Tyk configuration from the standalone.conf file. What we want to do here is to change this to, say, tyk.hybrid.conf. That's the file that we just updated. That's the file that our installation is going to be using to, well, install this gateway. So heading back over to our terminal, and over here next, I think I'm already in the right directory. No, I need to head over here. Okay, I've got everything here. So I'm just going to hit docker compose up-d, and that should install my gateway in a Docker container. So if I do a Docker PS, I can see both two gateways that are running right now. I've got, maybe if I can make it a little bit smaller, it might be a little bit more visible. Nicely. I've got my gateway and Redis, both of them set up. So my Docker container is running. It has now been linked and connected to the management layer or the control plane which is hosted in Tyk Cloud. What we could do here is we can do, actually, let me just clean this up a little bit. And make this a little bit bigger again and do a quick curl request to my local host. Port was 8080 and say hello. So that tells me that the gateway is up and running and is receiving request and sending me back a response, which is great. So now that we have done our part 2, let's go into the API management side of things. So let's head on over once again to our API manager, API dashboard, and let's create a new API. So I'm going to call this the hybrid API. And I'm going to be using HTTP bin for this. And there are a few different types of APIs that you can create using this. But for now, let's keep it simple. We're going to be creating an HTTP API, REST API essentially, and hit configure. Now it gives me a choice to select which gateway that I want to link to, or which the gateway to which I want to deploy this API to or connect this API with. So if you were using the cloud solution, then you can pick one of these automatically. You can easily select this and it'll be hosted right there. For our use case, I'm just going to be I'll connect it myself because we don't really need it because we are hosting things ourselves. So I'm going to hit confirm over here. The next step is all the way down here. There's the authentication mode, and we'll get to authentication really shortly. We're almost at time. We're about 20 minutes in now with the demonstration. I'm going to hit keyless just for the first segment of this demonstration. So heading out here, I've got my hybrid-API. And hopefully that's not going to cause me any issues with the URL. There you go. I've got, this is the listen path that I'm looking for. So let's head back out here. And I'm going to try running a curl request on localhost 8080 and hit my hybrid, it's not the right spelling, hybrid-API/get. I think if everything goes well, I will get back a response. So this is essentially a response coming from HTTP bin. What we have now done is we have created, installed, we have a control plane that is hosted on our Tyk cloud. We have created and linked a Tyk gateway, a worker gateway locally on my system. This can easily be your own data center. This can easily be your own AWS instance or Kubernetes cluster if you want. And we have connected the two. We've added an API now, which is being routed through our Tyk gateway. Now, that at the face of it, that may not sound a lot because it's essentially replacing one URL for the other, but really now we are primed to perform API management on that specific API. So right now it is an open API. So, that essentially means that anyone with this URL will be able to access this particular API with no restrictions whatsoever. And if you're creating public APIs, that's essentially what you would want. But if you don't want to do that, then you can essentially add a layer of authentication here. So the way you would do that is firstly, change the authentication mode to authentication token. I'm going to hit update here. So immediately what you would see is if I go back here and try to curl the same URL, it'll give me an authorization field missing error. So essentially looking for an authorization, it's looking for an API key, which it's not finding, and therefore it has restricted my access. So let's see how we can do that. So there are two ways in which you can actually create an API key for your authentication token, where you can do that on a per API basis, where you can go under keys and you can just add a new key for that specific API. For a small number of APIs, that is perfectly fine. That is perfectly convenient. So by all means, go ahead and do that. But in most cases where you have multiple APIs, tens, hundreds, thousands of APIs, then it can be quite cumbersome for you to try and manage individual keys for individual APIs. So the way around that, or the way to actually manage that in a much more efficient and user-friendly way, is through what we call policies. Policies define the rules of engagement for how your users can interact with your API from a security perspective, from a rate limit perspective, from a quota perspective. So a few different rules of engagement there. And the keys that are created using these policies essentially import all of the different rules of those engagements when they are being generated. So this is again a two-step process. So let's start with creating the policy. Heading over to, you can choose an API straight off the bat, or you can add APIs at a later stage as well. I'm going to head on over to config. I'm going to call this my hybrid policy. I need to put in expiration date time. I'm going to put in 1 hour for now. I'm going to create the policy. So policy has been created. Next step is to go over to keys. I'm going to add a key using the policy that we just created. And it's going to import all of the things that we might have specified in the policy. Right now, we've gone with default settings, but you'll see shortly that we'll be changing that. So I'm going to create a key right now. I'm going to copy this key. Don't lose this. Head back over. Now what I want to do is I'm going to add a header. I'm going to call it authorization. Add that key right here. And hopefully, if everything again goes well, we will get back our response. So now this is a secure way for you to for users to access your APIs, for you to allow access your APIs to only specific users with this authentication key if they have so. So with that, moving on to the next segment. So we've now created, we've added an API and secured that API. Let's move really quickly to the next and final segment where we're going to be looking at rate limiting things. So back to policies, because that's what's essentially managing the rules of engagement. So over here, if you look at the top, you've got global limits and quotas. And first thing here is rate limiting. So rate limiting essentially is the number of requests that you can make to an API, number of requests that you can make to an API over a period of time. So we'll see this in action really quickly. I'm going to set a really small rate over a small period of time. I'm going to hit update. And if everything goes well over here, what this should do is that as soon as it hits 3 requests from me within that 10-second time span, it will prevent me from making any further requests. Once that 10 seconds has passed, then we can move on to the next stage, and the cycle renews after that. You can obviously set a longer time period if you want. So heading back over, I'm going to quickly clear this out once again. Did I type the wrong? Oh, yes. Head on over to my curl request with the token. So I've got my first call, got my second, my third, and I hit my rate limit right here. So hopefully that is visible to you right now. And as soon as I think while I'm finishing this sentence, the rate limit would have renewed already. So if I go back in now, it will give me a response. So that is how you would rate limit. And the reason why, the use case for rate limiting could be a few different things. One of which could be your traffic management, your server load management. It could also be part of your monetization strategy, where you might want to provide access, a limited number of access for free users, potentially more for paying users. Probably a more efficient way or a better way to do that, especially if you're dealing with larger time spans, like in weeks or in months, would be through using quotas, which is essentially the same as your rate limiting. The difference there is the time span is a little bit longer than your rate limit. So different use cases, the reasons why you might be using one over the other. So with that, I think that's kind of the final stage of the demonstration, primarily looking at these 3 key activities. There are obviously more things that you can do, more things that you might want to explore, but we'll see how we are doing for time, and we can always circle back to this if there is, unless there are any specific questions that might pop up. I'm going to quickly stop sharing and see if there are things or questions. Curious from you as well, Andy, if there is anything that you might want to add, anything that you might want to highlight with our hybrid offering at the moment and the demonstration that we just had.
Yeah, no, the demo is really cool, but we could also call out the fact, I think you might have alluded to it, but just to explain again. So you've got in this cloud hybrid setup, you've got some edge gateways that are managed inside cloud, and you've got your own hybrid gateways running wherever you want. When you publish an API in the control plane inside dashboard, you can essentially selectively load APIs on different gateways. So imagine that you publish an API that you only want to be made available to your consumers in Singapore, say. You can tag that API in the dashboard, and once you tag it, it will only be loaded on a gateway with essentially the corresponding tag. So you essentially get to shard, as we call it, or selectively load APIs. Another use case for that, the classic one, in fact, is internal versus external APIs. So you might want to expose different APIs on different gateways to different consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really, really good point where you might currently, I think, without tagging by default, any API that you create would be accessible through your hybrid gateway. But you do have the opportunity to essentially select which gateway you're going to be deploying which APIs to. And that also talks about, you can have a setup where you may have certain number of gateways that are hosted on Tyk Cloud, and then you may still have certain worker gateways that are hosted on your own infrastructure. And that's the true, I would imagine that's the true essence of hybrid, where you can really mix and match in terms of where and how you're hosting your edge gateways. And the idea there is, no matter where you are hosting that, whether it's on our infrastructure or your own, the idea is that you still have that single pane of glass, the single management layer or control plane that will help you manage it all, essentially. So that's kind of the real idea there.
And actually, I'll mention now as well, the thought just occurs to me, another use case for hybrid is for those companies that there might be regulatory requirements or data privacy requirements, say, where your organization needs to own your data. And you might think that if that is the case, then a fully self-managed solution is what you need. But I would argue that's not necessarily the case. In a Tyk Cloud hybrid setup, the control plane is essentially configuration data. All of the runtime stuff is going to be going through your gateways that you host. In that hybrid cloud architecture, you can also set things up such that analytics goes to your own observability platform. So you could have analytics that's getting generated by your hybrid gateway being sent to, for example, your own Prometheus or Datadog or Splunk, whatever it might be. It need never go anywhere near the control plane.
Absolutely. I think that is one of the big use cases when it comes to a hybrid setup anyway, because regulatory compliance requirements, and you really want to make sure that you are very well aware and in control of the data that you are storing, processing, managing, what's happening in transit, what is happening at rest, all of that to be completely managed by you, with sort of the still having that benefit of having a little bit of convenience, not a little bit, okay, a great deal of convenience when it comes to having that control plane with a reduced, again, total cost of ownership. Because if you are going fully self-managed, which again, like you said, it might be a requirement because of your compliance needs or the degree of control that you might want. But at the same time, if that's really not the case, and you have that little degree of flexibility there, then it still works better when it comes to the cost of ownership on an ongoing basis, because we're not just doing a setup here. We are looking potentially for a solution that works over years. Maybe it gets upgraded, but potentially this is something that, it's going to be critical infrastructure for your API first business or your API product. So absolutely agree with you on that. I'm not seeing any further questions at the moment. I think if there isn't anything specific coming from anybody else, I'm more than happy to stop here. I think we promised about 30 minutes for the session with 15 minutes of just discussions and questions. We will definitely have more sessions coming up. There will be okay, there is a question. Maybe Andy might have a response to this. So the question is, how can I automate the registration of new endpoints via Swagger from microservices? I'm assuming it's not just Swagger, perhaps even considering Open API specification in this case, and how you might be able to do some of the automation. So Andy, thoughts on that? The question is, how can I automate the registration of new endpoints via Swagger from microservices?
Yep, so there's a few things we can talk about there if we unpick that. So first thing is, during the demo, obviously Budha was using the dashboard user interface. Sitting beneath that user interface, there is a REST API. So essentially everything that you can do manually through the UI can be automated, either by going directly to that REST API, but there's other ways as well that Tyk can be seamlessly integrated into your CI/CD pipelines. So other alternatives include a command line interface that we provide called Tyk Sync. And for those users that are Kubernetes savvy, we have an operator for Kubernetes, a bunch of custom resource definitions that essentially you can create a YAML manifest describing your API and have that automatically applied to your cluster. So the automation's there for Swagger or OAS, let's just use those terms interchangeably. There is capability within the dashboard to, number one, import from OAS, and then we will translate that into our own internal format. We also have a brand new capability, which it showed up in your dashboard, Budha, when you created a new API. It said, I think it said early access. Yeah, if we go there, so there's a new type called OAS HTTP. We're just starting to roll this capability out. So the thing that I just described previously, let me just restate that. You can import from OAS and we would translate that into our own internal format. This new thing, OAS HTTP, essentially allows you to import from OAS, and we will actually maintain all of the Tyk configuration of that API as an OAS document as well. So essentially, we're using OAS as our own internal format. So you can build your microservices, you can describe those microservices in OAS, and in the same tool that you're doing that, perhaps you're using Visual Studio, for example, or some other IDE, you don't actually have to go anywhere near the dashboard UI. You can carry on working in your IDE of choice, and in that same OAS spec, you can start adding Tyk behaviors. So we've got some extensions or annotations for OAS that will allow you to configure Tyk stuff directly in OAS. I hope that answered the question and didn't confuse people.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really helpful there. I think just to give you an idea here, the import of APIs, essentially, you can have a few different ways in which you can do this. You have, like Andy mentioned, you can have it from Swagger. You can also actually add your SOAP APIs from WSDL. And you can have them from Tyk definition if you're already using Tyk before and you want to import that in here, or you can have your API blueprint as well in JSON. So that's the more import side of things. And like Andy mentioned, this is more essentially us taking your OAS and transforming that into, or translating that into our own API definition. But the cooler thing that we are really excited about at this point is this area where you're essentially looking at a more design first approach to API management. I think that's kind of what we are really looking to go for. And we're trying to do this in a way where, unlike some of the other folks in the market trying to sort of taking a translation approach, we are essentially keeping your OAS as is and then adding on to that. So if you were to ever export it out of Tyk as well, I think that it's a lot easier in that case, instead of looking at a translated API definition. And at the same time, like Andy mentioned, it enables you to integrate or work with tools that you've been working previously, because most of the tools, again, has support for Open API specification, has support for Swagger, and it just works a lot more seamlessly versus having to work with something completely different. In most cases, that again is not an issue with Tyk, but here it just makes your overall development cycle a lot easier. And it also reduces a little bit of your learning curve as well, because if you have been using Open API specification previously, then you are probably familiar with all of that already. So instead of having to go really deep diving into something that is completely different, you are working in a more familiar territory, working with familiar tools. And yes, there will still be a little bit of a learning curve, but it's definitely not as extensive as having to do everything completely differently. Okay. Thank you so much for that question. And thank you, Andy, for the response as well. It's really, really helpful. And just looking at anything else anybody else wants to ask before we close our session out today? Just a quick announcement. We do have a few exciting events also coming up. I will post the link really shortly, where if you're interested in something like Open API specification, or you're interested in, say, developer experience, if you're interested in API security, we've got a whole suite of events coming over the next 2 weeks, which might interest you greatly. So do feel free to have a look at it. We are going to be having something called the Tyk Cloud Office Hours, where we'll be taking a little bit more of a business, not business really, but really answering some of your burning questions, essentially around Tyk Cloud, Tyk Hybrid, some of the use cases, some of the case studies, some of the key challenges with it, and what we are solving, what we are trying to achieve. Hopefully enabling you to sell Tyk to your bosses if you are interested and if you're keen to do that. So I'm just going to put in the webinars list right here. So if you're interested, definitely feel free to register for them. They are all up and running, and we are hard at work with preparation. And at the same time, we have our end of the year API extravaganza that is coming up, which is essentially a 2-hour session, pretty much a talk show that we are going to be running together with the likes of Kin Lane, from folks from Twilio, folks from Rubix. We've got a whole range of really, really exciting folks coming in. It'll be me hosting, which is going to be a really, really exciting prospect, but I'll be joined by some of the greats of the industry. So definitely feel free to, I would definitely recommend you to join that. And I'll see you next time. So once again, if there are no further questions, I would say thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you. Hopefully you found this useful. Hopefully you found this something that you can get up and running with really quickly as well. And do let us know what you thought about it. Once you've tried it, let us know if you've found any issues or challenges. We are always looking for feedback. We are always looking to make things easier and simplified as much as possible. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andy, as well. And until next time, take care and see you. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.